Back again for more music fun. This is the Planet LP Podcast. I'm Ted Asregadoo. Great to have you along for the ride. Have you gone through a period where you revisit music that shaped your musical tastes? If so, chances are you revisited music from roughly middle school to your mid-20s. That's what happened to me when I revisited the early recordings of Pat Benatar. Her music was in high rotation on my personal playlist between the late 70s and the early 80s. And yes, these were my years when I was in junior high and high school. So it seems fitting to spotlight one of my high school girlfriends. Well, she was my girlfriend in my mind, whose first 4 albums contained some solid hard rock and more. Life is too short, so why waste precious time, right? Right, so here comes a whole lot of me talking about a whole lot of Pat Benatar. Pat Benatar's first 4 albums contain many of her most popular songs. Well, as I said earlier, they were in high rotation on my personal playlist during junior high and high school, at least part of high school. And I say junior high because I didn't go to a middle school. I went to an actual junior high. I'll confess right up front that I didn't know much about Pat's music until I bought a cassette of her second album, Crimes of Passion. That was in 1980. It's a record that sold like 4 million copies in 1980. With record sales like that, it meant that Pat Benatar was on the radio a lot. And when MTV became a thing in the early 80s, she was on MTV a lot. And there's no doubt about it that Pat Benatar in this period of her career was a major musical force who broke through the glass ceiling of hard rock. But the road to rock and roll pioneer and eventually rock and roll royalty wasn't a straight line for her. She was born Patricia May Andrzejewski. As of this recording in 2025, that's June of 2025, she's 72 years old. She was born in New York City. Eventually, she married her high school sweetheart, a guy named Dennis Benatar, after she dropped out of college in 1972. She was 19 at the time. Dennis was in the military, so it meant that the Benatars moved around a bit. At one point, she was working like at a bank as a teller. Well, after expressing her desire to be a singer, Pat and Dennis moved back to New York City where she could pursue her dream. In 1979, after a few years of toiling away at singing gigs, Pat's music career started to take off after signing with Chrysalis Records. 1979 was also the year that Pat and Dennis filed for divorce. She kept Dennis's last name, and it's been her stage name for her entire career. 79, as I said, she signed with Chrysalis Records, but it was also the year that her first album, In the Heat of the Night, came out. It was released on August 27th and featured 3 singles. One that most people will know, Heartbreaker, because that was the highest charting one. We Live for Love, my personal favorite. And then she did a cover of I Need a Lover. That was the first single off the album. It didn't do very well. As I said, Heartbreaker is probably the most recognizable. That charted the highest as well at number 23 on the Billboard Hot 100 and on number 19, or at number 19 on Cashbox. Cashbox, if you don't know, was a competitor to Billboard back in the day. I Need a Lover was a cover of a Johnny Cougar tune. Who's Johnny Cougar? Johnny Cougar dropped the Cougar later and just went with his given name, his real last name, which is Mellencamp, which he's known as now. He did pretty well with that song. It came out in 1978, and it went to number 28 in the U.S. Top 40 of that year. But for Pat, the single kind of stiffed. We Live for Love, as I said earlier, was my personal favorite. I think it's like a new wave banger, man. It's penned by guitarist and future husband, Neil Giraldo. It went top 10 in Canada. And on the album tracks in the US, it charted in the top 30. Those were the power trios of the singles, all still pretty solid to this day. They have tried and true rock sounds. They're effective in their hooks. And when it comes to We Live for Love, it pushes the boundaries of rock music by writing what was called the new wave at the time. But like many debut albums, In the Heat of the Night is uneven. Songs like My Clone Sleeps Alone and Don't Let It Show sound like they could be in musicals. It sounds very theater, very over the top in a way. But overall, it's a fair to good record. There's one song called So Sincere. It actually closes out the album that I think you should check out because it sounds like a song that Blondie would have done back in the day. I mean, you can totally hear the Debbie Harry phrasing. At least I can hear Debbie Harry there. She could have easily sang that song. So go check that one out on streaming if you haven't already heard it, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. It might not be any surprise that that song sounds a bit like Blondie because the producer of the album In the Heat of the Night was a guy named Mike Chapman. Mike Chapman produced Blondie's Parallel Lines, which had a couple of their big hits, One Way or Another and Heart of Glass, also known at the time as the disco song. So there was momentum from In the Heat of the Night on that first record, and there are many songs on that record that signal what was to come on Pat's second album, Crimes of Passion. And we'll get to that album right after this.
Heartbreaker, dream maker, love taker, heartbreaker!
Hey folks, are you tired of scrolling through playlists, desperately seeking out that authentic old school sound? Well, I'm here to tell you I found something else. The Afterworld. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's Steve Fox's Old School, 24/7 of nothing but pure, unadulterated classics. From soul to funk that moves your feet to disco to the golden age of hip-hop, you're going to get a heapin' helping of hits and deep cuts you rarely hear anywhere else. So do yourself a favor and let Steve Fox take you on an old school musical journey at stevefoxoldschool.com. It's the real deal. And it's about to level up with a new groove coming. Steve Fox's Old School. Check it out now, stevefoxoldschool.com. Almost a calendar year after the release of In the Heat of the Night, Pat Benatar releases Crimes of Passion in 1980, one of her most successful albums. Now, usually in this game of rock and roll, your second album can sometimes suffer from what they call the sophomore slump. That's usually where the songs just aren't as good as the debut, and they are kind of like, it's all right. But this was anything but. This record came charging out of the gate, loaded with 3 singles. Hit Me With Your Best Shot reached number 19 on the Billboard Hot 100 and went gold. You Better Run on the U.S. Top 50. And just as an aside, you always know if people ask you the trivia question, what was the first video they played on MTV? And if you say Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles, you're right. But if they say, what was the second song? It was actually this one, You Better Run by Pat Benatar. It's a cover. It's not even an original from the Young Rascals from 1966. So again, if you got a streaming service or if you got YouTube, do yourself a favor and listen to the original from the Young Rascals from 1966 and then treat yourself to the 1980 version from Pat Benatar. The last single that was released off this record was Treat Me Right, and that cracked the top 20 in the U.S. So if you're the president of, say, Chrysalis Records in 1980, and Pat Benatar's Crimes of Passion did this kind of business, peaked at number 2 in North America and France, was certified 4 times platinum in the U.S. and 5 times platinum in Canada. Platinum means you've reached 1 million sales, and is one of your artists, your stable of artists, one of their most commercially successful albums, and granted they only have 2 at this point, or she only has 2 at this point, you'd be all like, man, oh man, I've got retirement money, folks. And he probably did. But Crimes of Passion was also the first album that I personally bought of Pat Benatar's. It was actually the cassette, but I played this tape a ton of times. So much so that when I hear this album now, it takes me back to high school. Not only the hits, but the deep cuts. I remember, just as an aside, in high school, and I remember some idiots were talking about the satanic panic that had gripped America at that point in the 80s. There was a group called the Parents Music Resource Council and other kind of people that were very reactionary, hiding under the cover of religion, that were saying that rock and roll music was devil music. So I had said something to one of these guys at school that I really like Pat Benatar, and he's all like, Pat Benatar, she has that song called Hell is for Children. That's satanic. And I'm all like, the song is about child abuse, you idiot. It's about all the horrible things adults do to children. He didn't believe me, though. He told me he didn't want to listen to any of Pat Benatar's music because it might cause him to, start worshiping the devil. I just told him, I said, hey, read the lyrics. Hell is for Children is not what you think it is. But he really wanted nothing to do with any rock artists who were allies of the devil. So there's my high school story for that one. Little Paradise. It's another song that I really like off this record. It's a good rocker with kind of a shuffle feel. And even though I didn't know who Kate Bush was in 1980, I thought that Pat Benatar's cover of Kate Bush's Wuthering Heights was really great. I still do. I had no idea it was a cover at the time. It wasn't until like 5 years later when I was becoming infatuated with Kate Bush and I was discovering her back catalog that I'm all like, oh, she did Wuthering Heights? Oh, she wrote it. Oh my God. And then I thought, I only knew it from the Pat Benatar version. That could be the case for a lot of cover tunes. You just don't know that they are cover tunes. And I think maybe, like You Better Run, some people didn't know it was Young Rascals. I certainly didn't at the time. So I'm not claiming to be the deepest music historian when I was just a teenager. Back to the music. Prisoner of Love and Out of Touch close out this record, and they're pretty solid songs. I'm sure they just killed live too. Overall, I thought that Crimes of Passion was probably the best of the 4 albums, but it's not my favorite of this era. That would come a year later.
Promises in the dark.
July 6, 1981, I am going into my junior year of high school. So it's the summer before my junior year. And Pat Benatar releases Precious Time. I bought this record that summer. Precious Time really didn't do as well as Crimes of Passion, but I think I'm more taken by these songs on what is considered to be a sleeper album for Pat. High school is kind of a volatile time for most people, and I moved a lot during these high school years. In fact, I attended 3 high schools. So when Crimes of Passion came out, I was on high school number 3 going into my junior year. And so I didn't have any friends yet, but I had music and a little bit of money from, working odd jobs around the house and getting some cash from my parents. So I bought Precious Time because I really liked Crimes of Passion. I remember I had the cassette, but this time I actually bought the record. And the first single I heard on the radio was Fire and Ice, which I thought was okay, but it did really well for her. It topped out in the top 20 in the US, number 2 on the mainstream rock charts. And that's mainly where I heard it, because back then I listened to the radio a lot, and I listened to what they called album-oriented rock stations. They don't really exist anymore. I guess the closest analogy is classic rock, but this was back in the day when radio stations would not only play, say, the single off a rock album, but the program directors and the music directors would find other cuts on the album to feature. They weren't oftentimes officially released as a single by the record company, but this is also back in the day when DJs and music directors and program directors were trying to build their audience with surprises. So if Pat Benatar was a top artist, for example, that meant that there were probably a number of other cuts off that record that could easily be played in the course of your programming day. So I would just leave the radio on because it was full of surprises back then and magic. Not so much anymore. And I heard a number of songs off of Precious Time, not only Fire and Ice, but Promises in the Dark, which was a single, but rock radio got on it first and played it outside the official single release. So I got to, hear it before. But I also had the record. And I did like that song. I thought, my God, what a voice. She just, starts slow and it builds up and it builds and it builds. But what I love about this song is that it melds two things. One, a super strong voice in Pat's singing. And secondly, it's the band led by Neil Giraldo. This guy just smokes on guitar. He is so good. But he's not like one of those guitarists who is a shredder that, kind of, wanking around. He really is melodic. He's got some great riffs. He keeps the energy really forward moving. But of course, it's the back end too. He's got a really strong drummer with the band at this point, Myron Grombacher. Not the best stage name, but he's got, this guy's got some chops. And then on the low end, they've got, I think they rotated basses. I don't know if they always had the same bassist. And I mentioned Neil Giraldo for a reason. And it's because Pat recently said in an interview with Dan Rather that she wanted a partnership as she went into the music business, a partnership like a lot of people that she admired in the rock world, where her guitarist was to be her musical partner, like Jimmy Page was to Robert Plant, or Keith Richards was to Mick Jagger. She found in Neil Giraldo that partner. He was a really good guitarist, like I said. He's aggressive, but he's also incredibly melodic, who can satisfy that desire to rock out, but also bring it back to some cool pop riffs in a way. So he wasn't so wedded to the heavy sound, although it was always kind of heavy. But when I bring up melody and the pop hooks and things like that, there are some guitarists that do this really well. And they do it in a way that's not sort of hackneyed. It's not sort of like, oh, that riff again. No, this guy had some kind of cool riffs in his arsenal, and he spiced up the songs really well. So I think their partnership worked excellent on this record. There's also a cover, which is something that she has done on all these records up to this point. She'll cover a classic song, and this time she went for the Beatles. She did a cover of Helter Skelter, which wasn't bad. I thought it was fine. It wasn't overplayed like the other two records. So when I hear the songs now, I don't feel like they've been burnt out by radio. I feel like that there's still some freshness to them. And yes, they do always take me back to my high school years. I remember sitting in my room reading the lyrics to Promises in the Dark and Fire and Ice and all these great songs on the record. But there was always, the artist would always include like a little postcard or a little piece of information about joining the fan club. So I did join the fan club, the Pat Benatar fan club. I thought, well, I wrote her a letter. I can't remember what I wrote, but I'm sure it was something like, I just think you're so great and love your music, and the new album is fantastic, and I hope to see you when you come in concert, and I live in California and you live in California now, and maybe one day we'll be able to meet. Put it in the mail. Yes, I was developing a deep crush on Pat Benatar. So I've told this story on this podcast before, but if you haven't been along for the entire ride, it'll be fresh to you. And it goes something like this. I'm with my mother, and I'm at the checkout counter. We're at the grocery store, and they always have the magazines sitting there, and there's a People magazine, and Pat Benatar's on the cover. And I'm like, oh, look, there's Pat Benatar. And it kind of talks about her life. And in parentheses, it says she's available, to which my 16-year-old self thought, so I've got a chance. I've got a chance with Pat Benatar. So I begged my mom. I said, can we buy this? And she said, sure. So threw it into the groceries, and I got home and I read it. And it talked about how she was newly single and everything like that. I thought, yeah, I got a chance. I'm 16. She's 12 years older than me. Yeah, right. But a guy can dream, right? So then I come to find out that she ends up marrying her guitarist, Neil Giraldo, next year in 1982. And I'm all like, well, was she available or wasn't she? Like I said, a boy can dream. And that was one of my high school girlfriends, one of two high school rocker girlfriends, the other one being Chrissy Hind. So I had posters of them on my wall. So that was my Pat Benatar crush phase. And then I got crushed to buy it after she got married. I'm like, oh, darn, I missed out. But I did get to see her perform in Oakland, California at the Oakland Arena. I went with my brother, Steve. And it was this very same tour to promote the album Precious Time. And back then it was general admission. So the floor of the auditorium was open. There were no assigned seats. There were no seats at all. You just walked onto the floor and you got as close to the stage as you could. So I got pretty darn close and I got to see her perform. David Johansen opened. He used to be with the New York Dolls. And of course he had his own solo career, recently passed away. Pat Benatar came out, did a smoking great job. Absolutely. The band was on fire. Whole thing was so fantastic. And then she makes an announcement from the stage. No, it wasn't that she's going out with this young kid, this young brown kid from in the suburban Bay Area. No, that wasn't the announcement. She said, this concert's being recorded for the radio. And sure enough, they played it on the radio a few weeks later, and I recorded it. Back then as well, they were doing a lot of bootlegs that you could buy. And I'm not proud of this, folks, but I tried to pass off the recording from the radio as a bootleg and tried to sell it at school for like $10. This guy says, well, I want to try it before I buy it. So he tried it and he listened to it. And I forgot to cut off a little bit of when the radio announcer comes on at the end of the concert and says, you've been listening to Pat Benatar, blah, 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 blah. So you could hear him say, and then I just stopped it. And I couldn't take it anymore because I like this guy. I said, I have a confession. And he says, what's that? I said, well, that's not a bootleg. And he said, I kind of figured it wasn't. It sounded too good for one. And then secondly, I heard some voice at the end. I go like, yeah. Do you still want it though? He's all like, yeah, I'll make a copy of it. So he did. And so we still remain friendly. But he said, yeah, I kind of figured you were full of crap. My hustle went bad. What can I say? I'm just not a hustler. So yes, Promises in the Dark, Fire and Ice, Helter Skelter. There's some great songs on there. Check out Precious Time, one of my personal favorites from this era. And then finally, to close out this era, I'm going to talk about an album that was pretty darn good as a singles record.
You can cry tough, baby. It's all right. You can let me down easy, but not tonight.
The amazing thing about Pat Benatar at this phase of her career, the early part, she was releasing an album a year. So that kind of pace takes its toll, and it started to show on 1982's Get Nervous. This comes out October 29th, 1982. So she took a little bit longer to record this one. It was a bit of a departure from her previous records in that they added a keyboard player to the mix, a guy named Charlie Giordano. And he shows up on the videos and stuff, so you see him as part of the band. The big single that came out initially was Shadows of the Night, which if you've ever watched the video, it's kind of a World War II themed video where Pat and the other band members and Judge Reinhold is in there too. They're flying their, looks like their P-51 Mustangs or something across enemy lines to battle the Nazis. Not that great of a video. I don't know what it really had to do with the song, but it's kind of an epic sounding song. It was fine. I liked it just fine. What I really liked, though, were the singles Looking for a Stranger. I thought that was really kind of a cool twist and stylistically for the band because of the addition of the keyboard. And then the title track, which actually is called Anxiety, but in parentheses, it's Get Nervous, was pretty good too. That one also had a new wavy sound to it. The problem is after this, the album starts to falter. Songs like Fight It Out and The Victim are just like, they're all right. Little Too Late was also released as a single, and that was pretty good. It felt more like classic Benatar. But then you get the back end of the album of I'll Do It, I Want Out, Tell It to Her, and Silent Partner. All of which were just sort of So you got a really good singles album out of Get Nervous. You didn't get a solid front to back album like you did with Precious Time and Crimes of Passion. And so in a way, Get Nervous bookends those 4 albums, whereas In the Heat of the Night was kind of uneven. Get Nervous was also kind of uneven. But she was trying to move into a different phase. I think that they had kind of taken that musical style, the Pat Benatar sound, as far as they could. And on Get Nervous, there were attempts to sort of push those boundaries. And I think you hear it with Looking for a Stranger, and definitely on Anxiety, in parentheses, Get Nervous. Her biggest hit after that, of course, was a song that was tucked into a live record called Live from Earth. And that song is Love is a Battlefield, probably one of her biggest songs as well. And that signaled that Pat was going in a different direction. But as I said, these first 4 albums for me really shaped my musical taste. I liked the melodic kind of hard rock that she was doing, the big voice. I mean, she can sing like, well, she's just great, right? Of course, she's got such a fantastic voice for rock, but she's also very versatile. I think she was trained in opera at one point. The fact that they double her vocals a lot on the records gives her a kind of signature sound. And I saw her with my brother. I know I talked about the Oakland show that I saw in 1982, but flash forward to around 2011, maybe 2012, and there was a winery near where I live in Livermore, California. The winery is Wente, and if you go to a supermarket where they sell wine, or a liquor store, you might see their bottles on the shelves. Well, they also do a concert series, and that tour had Pat Benatar and Blondie, which I referenced early on, touring together. Pat Benatar opened and Blondie was the headliner. And my brother and I went. I was working in radio at the time, and so I got some free tickets. I was working as a promotions director. I wasn't on the air. But because I was the promotions director, I got, first dibs on the tickets. So we went to see Pat Benatar and Blondie, and my God, Pat Benatar had not lost any of her vocal range. I'm like looking at my brother, Steve, and I'm all like, are you hearing this? This is so great. This is amazing. And watching all the audience members, mostly the women, were just singing along with a ferocity, especially songs like Invincible and Promises in the Dark. That one, oh my God, it was like most of the female contingents of fans were just singing along with her. And she could just hit those notes. And I'm all like, wow, that is not easy. So we stuck around for Blondie. Blondie came on, and I really like Blondie. I like their music, but Debbie Harry's voice just was not in good shape that night. And I'm sorry to say that my brother and I, we walked out of Blondie, just left. I just couldn't take it anymore. I was just like, this is not enjoyable. But boy, Pat Benatar sure left an impression on me. She's now 72, like I said. And as a 72-year-old, I don't think she can hit those notes as strongly as she could 10, 15 years ago, or even 40 years ago. But I've seen videos of her still performing, and, you got to drop it down a couple of keys, a little, just so you can kind of build that range there. And she still does a really good job. So she's touring with Bryan Adams right now. And I guess if you get to catch them over the summer, you get to see kind of a double bill of some 80s giants, Pat Benatar and Bryan Adams touring together. Well, that's going to close it out for the Planet LP podcast. I know there's been a whole lot of me talking about a whole lot of Pat. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing it and kind of revisiting this period of time in my life where these records meant a lot to me, and they still do to this day, with Precious Time being at the top, by the way, as you all know. So that's going to do it. Like I said, you can follow us along on socials, Planet LPs on Facebook, on Instagram, and I think that's it. Yes, I deleted my X account and I don't think I'm active on Threads anymore, so kind of paring back the social footprint. So until next time, thanks for watching and listening, and I'll talk to you soon.